Bruce, you must have something really good too.
Of course I do. It's Bruce Danielson, and I guess I'm here to entertain you too.
We're here with Pete Buttigieg,
You got it?
and but we're gonna call him Pete from now on so that we don't get mayor of South Bend, Indiana, right? Okay, and have a little interview with you, talk some city politics, maybe. One of the things I was going to ask you is, there's a lot of younger people getting involved with politics. It seems, you know, the two people we have in our runoff, Paul and Jolene, they're both the same age. I think Paul's 1 year older, Jolene's 39, and Paul is 40. And then the other candidates that ran against them in the general election were all over 50. And so they made a runoff. And one of the reasons a lot of people think that is because they really use social media and Facebook and got the millennials to go out and support them. Do you see that there's more millennials getting involved with politics more than, you know, maybe like 10 years ago?
I think so. You know, when I was a student, I used to work on an annual project at the Institute of Politics where I was that assessed kind of how involved young people were, what their attitudes were about political involvement. What we found was that people were very involved in their community, but not necessarily involved in politics in any way. I think that's really changed, and I think in many ways the 2016 election changed that. You couple that with the arrival of social media, and I think the increased importance of social media and how politics is done from now on. And I think you're going to see more and more of that. I'm finding the same kind of caliber and style of young people who, if they wanted to be involved, might have gone straight to Capitol Hill, you know, they've gone straight to national politics if they could,
Right.
are finding a lot more interest in the local level and the kinds of decisions and the kinds of issues that come up in city government. So I think it's a great time to be working in cities, and I think it's a great time to be involved with the younger generation coming up.
Yeah, that's the one thing that's totally unique about the two that made the runoff too, and which is on Tuesday, is that neither one of them have any government experience. Like, neither one of them have even been elected to dog catcher. They both have been involved with certain things. Joe did some stuff with the legislature to help protect kids, rape victims. So she had a law passed for that called Jolene's Law. And then she was involved with some school districting things. And Paul has sat on some boards, different city boards and stuff. But neither one of them have any government experience. Yet all the guys running against him, Jolene's the only female that was running. The other four that were running against him all had been legislators, city council. And do you see, is there a reason why voters don't have an issue with government experience? Is it because they don't like government and they'd rather have somebody from business? They're both entrepreneurs.
I think there's always an interest in how you can deliver, especially at the local level. It was a very similar dynamic for me. So I've been involved in campaigns and elections, but I had never held office when I ran for mayor. And my competitors were all people who had more elected experience. There was a county council member, there was a state legislator, and we weren't sure we could stack up next to them. But what we found was there was actually a lot of attitude for a fresh start. And I think sometimes a face from outside of that familiar world, not one of the usual suspects, can bring something a little bit different, especially at the local level, where sometimes what you need most is just a fresh set of eyes. No matter how good the previous administration has been, there's still a need for things to just be refreshed and changed and updated sometimes. And I think when you add to that the fact that the local government isn't much about ideology, it's very much about delivery. I think that any number of backgrounds, whether it is in government or whether it's in business or sometimes the military, can really bring a lot to the table. And so much also depends, of course, on very local issues and local concerns that a candidate has to be able to speak to. And it may or may not help to have a long track record and maybe a little bit of baggage and some of the strings attached over the years when you're going before voters for an office like that.
Yeah, our last mayor served 2 terms. We have term limits here. So you can serve 2 4-year terms, and then you can take 4 years off and run again. But that's a whole other different discussion. He came from the business world too and never had held any. He worked in the credit card industry. And his philosophy, and I want to ask you what you think of this philosophy. His philosophy was you run a city like a business. And what we found is that some of those things, the business acumen is always, he'd like to say, has worked in some ways. but it has really closed a lot of doors in transparency, and we've had tons of issues with that. What is your feelings on that? Is government and business, are they similar? Can you take things from business and?
I think you can certainly take business principles and use them to make government run more efficiently. We spent a lot of time, for example, I had been in the business world, and I came from a world where you really needed to show the results of what you were doing.
Exactly.
You needed to measure and demonstrate progress. And so we were very intentional about taking things that maybe used to be done by the seat of our pants or based on how we always did it before, and instead say, okay, show me how this works. But for us, that actually coupled with transparency, because what we were able to do then is the same data that I was using to manage the city, we were also putting out to residents so that they could decide, frankly, how to manage me. So data sets about things like what was going on with code enforcement. We had a big issue with vacant and abandoned houses. And I set a very ambitious target of dealing with 1,000 of them in 1,000 days. Part of what propelled us to meet that target was that we put a scoreboard, so to speak, online, and you could see how many houses we had addressed. And when we fell behind, you could see that too. And that lit a real fire, of course, for us to know that the public was watching. But there are some other ways where I think a government is just fundamentally different from a business. Part of what makes the private sector so dynamic is that businesses and business units sometimes fail and go out of business.
Yep.
And when you're in the business of keeping people safe, when you're providing fire and police protection or clean, safe drinking water, you simply can't afford to do anything that might fail.
That's
and
right.
you certainly can't ever shut down or go out of business. So some of the disciplines that make sense in the business world don't quite translate in politics. But I do think, if you emerge from the business world in terms of that mentality to do with accountability, and making sure you're managing things in a rigorous way, that can bring a lot of benefit to city government. They can otherwise get a little bit, sometimes a little stale, a little slow, and a little bit too much based on who you know instead of how you're doing.
Now, our city, and because I don't know, I didn't do enough research on this, but our city has a strong mayor form of government, and we have 8 city councilors who are elected through districts and at-larges. And how it works is the mayor is pretty much in charge of, well, the way the charter is written, the mayor is in charge of the city employees, making sure police, fire employees all do their stuff. And the city council is supposed to write policy. Sometimes those lines get crossed. What is your form of government in South Bend? Is it very similar to that?
It's somewhat similar, yes. So it's considered a strong mayor. I've got 9 council members, and they're partly elected from districts, partly at large, so it sounds like that's similar to.
So you never have to break a tie then?
That's right. No, I have veto power if
Just
a bill comes to my desk. But they
Some
don't
of your
have
vetoes are reading
yeah,
about
just
it.
had one this week actually.
Yeah.
But the real energy, I think, comes at its best from collaboration. But sometimes there are initiatives that we simply pursue as an administration. Sometimes an idea emerges in the council, and then it's up to us to try to implement it, assuming I approve. It always goes best when your council and your administration are on roughly the same page. But we also rely on those checks and balances. And I know that whenever I bring an idea, especially if it's a bold, new idea, to the community, it's going to face a lot of scrutiny from the council.
Right.
And that's, I don't always enjoy it at the time, but that can actually be a very helpful thing. It makes us sharpen our ideas, sometimes change them a little bit, make them better. And at the end of the day, we're usually able to get our initiatives through once they've been kind of tested in that process and sometimes reshaped as well.
It's kind of the opposite with our mayor. It's the council would bring policies forward and he would give it a lot of scrutiny.
Okay.
And he actually has vetoed a couple of things that he didn't like them doing. Either way. Well, let's talk about, unless you have something to add, Bruce, with the city side, I was going to talk a little bit about state politics.
Well, one of the things that I've been interested in is in the redevelopment of South Bend, from the heavy old industrial Midwest right out of Chicago, and that you've had to do a lot of redevelopment in town. And I know you've had some discussions about TIFs and how you use TIFs, and I just wanted to have you kind of talk about your philosophy of TIFs. Now, you're trying to redevelop blighted areas. The businesses left, the 1,000 houses left, are empty, and we have just the opposite problem here. We have almost no empty houses in this town. We have extremely low unemployment numbers here. So we use TIFs as kind of like booty prizes. There are, if you're part of the booty gang, you get a TIF. in South Bend. Talk about using TIFs, because I read a few things about what you'd been doing with TIFs.
Yeah, so the basic philosophy of TIF is that you borrow against some of the future potential of a development in terms of tax revenue in order to finance the groundwork you've got to lay to make that development happen in the first place. I did find when I arrived that there wasn't really a handbook with a lot of boundaries or parameters on how to use it, so we had to refine our policy on what was and was not a good use of the funds. We arrived at a few principles that were important. First of all, for us to invest in something, it really should have the potential to grow tax base and jobs. And we would often tie providing an incentive very much to some kind of guarantee or some kind of secure assurance of an increase in tax base and jobs. I also realized that we really shouldn't be incentivizing something that isn't a good business idea. So our job with TIF is not to take an unviable idea and turn it into something that'll work. It's much more of a tiebreaker. If we find something that's very promising, but just a little bit short of the kind of return on investment that it would take in order for it to succeed, we can break that tie. We try to really hold to a principle that says we want to see $10 or at least $5 from a private investor for every one of public dollars that we're going to put in, because we never want to be the majority partner in a private project.
Right.
And we try to make sure that it aligns with our policy goals, whether it's dealing with an area that's had a lot of blight and trying to get some energy back there, whether it's making sure that we expand commercial options, retail options, or in certain cases even mixed use and residential options for residents, meeting some kind of need that we have as a community. But you do need to be very careful with these policies because, especially if you're in a strong mayor system where the administration, as we do, has a lot of say on how that TIF gets used, you need to make sure it's delivered in a very transparent way and that the policy guidelines that are going to guide your decisions are clear to everybody, from the development community to the taxpayer.
Yeah, there was a study University of Iowa did. Their economics professor, or one of the adjuncts, I can't remember exactly, but said that a lot of TIFs just don't really have a payback. And unless they're applied in the way that you say, please tell us what the payback's going to be.
Right.
Please show us where the jobs are going to be created. Please show us what you're cleaning up and why you need to clean it up. But they found that, of course, they studied Iowa, not South Dakota, but they found that only about 20% of TIFs had any payback at all.
Really?
And out of that 20%, most of them never ever paid back the 100% of what the taxes were. So, but I want to talk a little bit about state politics. We've had this issue in South Dakota for quite a while. I mean, probably 30 years, where the populace continues to elect Republicans to our legislature. And, it's a super majority. I think there's only, 5 or 7?
There's 11 total
11
Democrats out of 105.
Across both chambers?
Yeah. So what we can never figure out as voters, I'm an independent. So I'll vote for both parties, but usually I lean Democratic. But what we can't ever figure out is, why is it that the citizens are continuing to vote for Republicans in the legislature who pass laws that hurt us, and then we turn around and we do all these initiatives and referendums, because that's big in South Dakota, we created it, and the voters always vote with the Democrats for these, because the Democratic Party usually initiates a lot of these referendums, like minimum wage. We've had twice on the ballot to try to make abortion illegal. And it's, it never passed.
Right.
And it seems like the voters always approve the initiatives that are very democratic, but are continually voting in Republicans who make laws that are bad for us, that we have to go and make initiatives. What do you do? What do you do as a party, as a Democratic Party, to try to fix that?
First of all, I'd rather be that way than the other way around. I'd rather be right on the issues as far as the voters are concerned, and then try to make sure our election results catch up to that, than be winning but be out of step with the voters. Because if you're winning and you're out of step, sooner or later you're going to be like that moment when Coyote's chasing Roadrunner off the cliff. He just hasn't looked down yet, and the bottom's going to fall out. What I think is a problem, though, is that when people look at Democratic leaders, they look at Democratic speeches, they look at Democratic politicians, they don't always hear about those issues that they agree with us on and that matter to them the most. I think that's actually only gotten worse since the election of the current president. And the reason is, I think a lot of folks on our side of the aisle are so fixated on it, we're just losing our minds over it. And so we can't talk about anything else. But if all we're talking about is him, then a lot of voters are saying, okay, but who's talking about me? And sometimes they don't hear the message that we have, even though I strongly believe that we have, and I'll speak about this evening at the event, we have a very strong message which has to do with making sure that we support people going about everyday life. That's, I think, the core bedrock organizing principle of the Democratic Party.
The working middle class.
I think so, and it always has been. And it should work for everybody, no matter what your background is. But certainly that kind of middle class American dream is at the heart of, I think, our values, and I think it explains most of our policies. But if all we're talking about is the characters and the palace intrigue and what's Jared Kushner up to and all those things, I think it's very hard for somebody to hear us if we're saying, look, we're the party that's trying to get you a raise, we're the party that's trying to make sure you have more freedom in your social and personal life, we're the party that's trying to support families, keep families together, and make it easier to raise a family in this country. Then I think people can hear us again. I think that's how we won in parts of the country like yours and like mine in previous years. And I think that's what it's going to take for us to have a message that will make sense no matter who's in the White House. We've got to build a majority of the last generation in the same way that conservatives did, really beginning in the 70s and 80s. I think that their era has come to a close. What we don't know yet is what the next era is going to be. And it's not necessarily going to be a Democratic era unless we really are proactive and shape that message and that future in a way that will make sense cycle after cycle, not just for the next election.
There's a try to find a way to tie those in together. As a person, I call it Washington D.C. by the way, outer space, because I don't follow federal stuff. I like to follow local and state because it just seems like you said there's so much drama and it seems like nothing's ever getting done. I'm going to talk about voter turnout a little bit. Now, I don't know how you do your city elections in South Bend. Are they separate from general?
Yeah, ours are timed to be in the off year, so the city really kind of gets its own election season.
Okay, that's what we do too. And the reason I ask that is we usually have a very high turn or vote out in South Dakota in the general election. It's usually around 70%, which is pretty good. But in our city elections, we can almost hardly ever beat that 30% mark. What's it like in South Bend? Is it similar to that there?
Yeah, it's not that different, although frankly we've had a struggle in national elections. In 2014, we were at, I think, 27 or 28% turnout for the congressional elections.
Oh, wow.
It's the lowest in the country.
Wow.
And it was really, it killed me because I had just come back from a deployment in the military that fall. And you believe you're out there fighting for democracy and making sure people are able to live in a democracy. You come home and the democracy is going unused in a lot of ways. Now, I think part of that's a response to some people feeling like the political process doesn't have a lot to offer them. And I think part of it, when you talk about that gap for city elections, is that sometimes city issues don't capture that same level of media interest and attention. And yet, people tend to know what's going on around them. They tend to understand their backyard. And so they care about things in different ways. And there's great potential there because it doesn't always collapse into the same political and ideological and partisan buckets that you almost immediately are dealing with at the state and national level.
I have one more question for you, because you just brought up something that I found interesting, and you probably see this in South Bend too. Our TV market and our media market in Sioux Falls is smaller, obviously, and so what you have is a lot of young reporters right out of college. This is their stepping stone. They come here, they do their 2 years at the TV station, and they move on to a bigger market. And do you think that has a little bit to do with why voter turnout in local elections may be low, is that there's just no historical background with the reporters? They're so young, they don't really know who the candidates are, they don't really know the issues.
I've never thought about how it bears on turnout, but I have noticed that effect, and it's a real challenge. I think we had at least one reporter who came from Sioux Falls to South Bend, and then 2 years later they were off to someplace else. And that's how it is for not all, but most of our TV reporters. Our print reporters tend to be more likely to be local. And so often what will happen is the TV reporters will key what they do off of what the print reporters of the blogs are doing because they have that local knowledge. As an elected official, I can deal with critical coverage. The thing that I really fear is garbled coverage, incorrect coverage. And so it's really important with reporters who are very new to an issue, especially a complicated issue that's been developing for 5 or 6 years, that they're up to speed just factually on what happened. And we do find we have to take extra time to really help and educate and inform the reporters, because otherwise it can be a real challenge on those complicated local issues.
We had an issue here a couple of years ago that I led a petition drive. I've been a petitioner for over 40 years in South Dakota. I've gotten involved in a lot of grassroots stuff back to 1966 was my first campaign. And
He's a lot older than he looks, by the way.
and so I've been very involved in a lot of this stuff through the years, and what you just said right there about having to take the time to educate the reporters is something that I struggle with all the time, trying to get reporters to understand what we're doing, because so much of what we do is deep, complicated issues that didn't just start yesterday.
Right.
A lot of the things that's going wrong with the Democratic Party, I was involved in back in the 60s and the 70s. And, both nationally and with the state issues and so on. And I did have one question, and I know we got to wrap up because you got to get down the hall. But there was Indiana has been it's been very democratic with the Bai family. And then now it's become an extremely the other direction, with Mike Pence being the governor for a while, and a lot of the people that come from Indiana. How do you deal with that? With South Bend has always been a very liberal hotbed of the state.
Yeah, South Bend is a traditionally democratic, though socially conservative city. But what we've found is that every pocket of Indiana has its own kind of unique political flavor, from Gary, which is very much a steel town, somewhat influenced by the political style of Chicago, to Evansville or Scott County, that are very much the South. Every part of Indiana has a different flavor to it. I think most states actually have some amount of that quality. What's interesting, though, is we're a state that has traditionally split its tickets or been open to voters from candidates from either side. I mean, a lot of the same people who voted for Mike Pence also voted for Barack Obama, and also voted for me, and then voted for Donald Trump. So I guess the big lesson you take away from it is never assume that you know how somebody's going to behave politically, just because of where they live or what they look like.
I've dealt with voter frustration.
Yeah.
And back in the 70s, it was voter frustration, and it's the same thing today.
Yeah.
And that's what we're experiencing this coming Tuesday.
I think that's right.
So I want to thank you for coming. And
Thanks, Pete. That was
And
wonderful.
it's been a pleasure to meet
Yeah.
you.
Sure thing. Thanks for joining.
And actually, this is Scott's website down
Okay.
here on the bottom.
Great.
Actually, I would love to have you look at this.
Okay.
We have another website, and I don't have it on the card because.
Okay.
But
Sioux Falls meeting.
it's sfmeetings.org.
Okay.
And if you drop me a line, I'll send it to you.
Okay. Thanks.
Scott and I are huge open government proponents.
Great.
And we created a
Here,
use
Aaron,
brand.
I'll let you, we're gonna do a little picture here while we're talking, so you can
We
get
did
down to
we
your-
did a search. We created a search engine.
Oh, really?
To search all the city videos and documents and agendas.
I've put up over
And it works.
3,500
It's
local
really works really
government,
good.
local
That's great.
government videos online. Everything is indexed back to.
1, 2, 3. Okay, one more.
So
Thanks. Yeah.
SF Meetings is an open government portal that we built.
That's great.
And
I
if you
wish
want to
somebody
search,
built ours for it. We did an open data policy,
Yeah.
and we're very proud of it. But it's
well, the
funny to
city
think
said they
somebody
couldn't
just
afford to
for
do
us.
it, so we did it for free.
There you go. $3.99.
Excellent. Look forward to hearing you tonight. We don't come up here to entertain you. We come up here to inform you.